Well, Clint, thanks for coming on and jamming with us. We are writing the Agentic Executive series, which is going to be another book that's coming out. And you know how these goes. You put these out. You can do like, hey, I'm going to talk to six different CEOs, but I thought maybe I should talk to one person who has been the CEO six different times, and that I can kill a lot of birds with one stone. So here we are.
Sure. You calling me old Eddie? That's what I'm trying
You,
to
well,
figure out
I'll
there.
use your line. You're a young old guy, so
Thank you. I think
you've
there's a
lived many
compo salt
lives.
in there somewhere. No, that's great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. So, obviously you and I have talked a lot about leading companies and then also about all the cool stuff that's going on with AI. Your kids are working in it, which is super cool. And so we're kind of seeing it from all different angles. And even I think at the work that we were doing before at Grayspace with some of the automations and AI that we were doing, like we were early on some of that stuff with the pricing analytics survey and whatnot. But before we kind of jump into that, we'd love to hear just, what do you define as a great CEO? I mean, you've been through the role a bunch of times, and share a little bit of your background because you got the scepter of leadership pretty darn early. So,
Yeah.
in your mind, you've been through it around. What's a great CEO?
Yeah. Thanks, Eddie. This is really a pleasure to spend some time with you today. Look, they come in all different shapes and sizes and different educational backgrounds and family upbringing. So, the term CEO is probably really mischaracterized a lot of the times. I think a great CEO, no matter what field they're in, has to do three things really well and is responsible for three things. Strategy. You have a lot of help. You have marketing people, you have boards, you can hire consultants, you may have a very strategic team, but ultimately the CEO is responsible for strategy. They don't look at the head of marketing and go, your strategy was wrong. The CEO owns the strategy for the company. Why are you going to win? Second is the type of people and culture. What's inbounds, what's out of bounds, what's acceptable, what's rewarded, what's a no-no. And, every company has a distinct culture. And so I think that the CEO owns, and it has to start from the top. We all know the cliches. And then third is the financial performance of the company. Ultimately, as a CEO, you're judged by how do you do? Revenue, EBITDA, multiple on, and what your value creation is. Ironically, and we've talked about this, value creation is important. All right, that's the reason we exist in business is how do you create more value? But we almost always talk only about the financial aspects of the company, right? What's revenue doing? Is it up or down? What's EBITDA doing up or down? And what's your earnings per share, et cetera. When the weird thing is like, it's really the strategy and getting people and culture to align and perform behind that. That is a predictor of the success. So I often say I can read the P&L. I know what the score is already. Why do we keep talking about the score and not how we played? And more importantly, what we're going to do next time to play better. So that's the three jobs: strategy, people, and financial performance.
What's funny is, as you said, a lot of people fixate on the financials, and I think value is, as you said, a better and more inclusive word, because one of the things that I've observed just working with you, both as your consultant and your partner, is that you're not creating value in your financial statement only. Let me put it this way: you've made a lot of people rich, both investors in your company, employees, and your team. But I think most importantly, you've made some of your customers have been very successful, and I think that's a reflection, I think, of how you've chosen to do strategy. It's not just a mercenary one. Like, you're not just trying to maximize the brand or the business that you're running. You've often leaned into a category. You're going to lift the entire space there. And then from a people and culture standpoint, I've seen you treat not only your team, but others in the industry with generosity and lean into like, hey, let's 1 + 1 = 11 here. And so like, I do think about that as I've noted that's different than not every CEO does that. And
Yeah.
I'm curious about which of your various stints beforehand, maybe give a little bit of a background there. Did you kind of make that realization that unlocking value for everybody, making the pie bigger, would benefit you for sure, but that's just not always the case for many CEOs?
Yeah, it's great. It probably goes back to my childhood if I had to be real candid. I mean, I was born in Anchorage, Alaska. Kind of, my parents were very young. I was told only a couple years ago I was basically brought home as the first child, and my parents um, to a dirt floor in Alaska, right? So I kind of started from a tough situation. My dad was entrepreneurial. He ended up having a very successful small business. And he was really very, very inspirational. He had a design firm back when Seattle was starting to design houses and Boeing was taking off. This is like in the 70s, early 80s. And as a kid, I was an entrepreneur's kid. I'd like go there and play with Hot Wheels on the floor. And he was incredibly focused on what the couple designing a home or a small business person designing their office, what their needs were. And he built a really good business. He probably could have made a lot more money, but he was really well known in the community for having great design, but also incredible customers, incredible referral base. He later was a coach. He probably put 20 to 30 kids through D1 soccer, and he was always maniacally focused on coaching collectively, but managing and leading and helping a child become the best soccer player they could very individually. So I think it's probably just honest that it came from my father and my mom, who were both small business owners. And, ultimately, it's so silly, but if it doesn't work for your customer and they're not able to treat their customer well, like, is it really a sustainable business? Right? Like, that's the only thing that really matters is, are you filling a need and helping your customer be successful with their customer? And as long as you manage your financials correctly, like I have to have good gross margins, I have to have a good OPEX, I have to produce EBITDA, we have to have growth. I don't understand another way. And I think everything else is really a shortcuts or short-sighted. So it's my natural tendency, as you know, to operate out of abundance, because I think weirdly, it's so rare that customers disproportionately reward you in ways that are really intangible. And that's been a hallmark of the companies that I've tried to lead in that way.
Well, it's fascinating as we've talked about business and strategy, but like oftentimes we talk about parenting and being a dad and children, and it's so cool to see how your dad and your mom. The sense that I get is you were there, playing and just being around. It's not like they were trying to like, hey, Clint, come over here, I'm going to teach you about business. You were just observing and absorbing what they were naturally doing. And I bet you, if we go back in time, we see the abundance that's there. And I think you're exactly right. Is that abundance is probably the only option if you're running a small business. Like small town can't go very far cheating people, being a mercenary. Whereas ironically, if you're running a large company, you kind of can get away with it more so than a small
Yeah.
business. So that route is
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah. And also we're playing the long game in these things, right? When you look at the truly great business leaders, these companies that have survived over decades or even centuries in some cases, I think at its core, there was always a real problem. That entrepreneur wanted to solve it. They did it for reasons outside of financial gain, almost always. Like all of these books, I know a lot of entrepreneurs, you do too. Rarely is it about the financial gain. They may become crazy wealthy, but usually it's the desire to fix something, to build something, to make something better than what previously is there. And so I think, ultimately, whatever category you choose or space you choose to operate in, if there's a problem and you can serve and fix that problem for your customer better than other people, and then you work harder and you manage the financial ratios in the business, you should win, assuming you're still curious and willing to stay ahead of the competition.
So I'm just trying to think through folks who know you, but like I know folks who they have become CEOs, and you can tell that was their goal and dream for a while. And I've never asked you this question, but you got the job pretty early. At what point did you decide that's what you wanted to do, or did it just kind of fall into your lap?
I think, it's a great question, Eddie. I don't know if there was an exact time. I've always definitely been performance driven. I've always had very high goals, a high
Hmm.
achievement drive for myself. I was a high level soccer player. I was a good student. I went to a school with a combination of those two. It's probably better than I, could have hoped for. And I was a first gen. And probably when I came out of school, making money was important to me.
Mm.
Being successful was important to me. I always ask people, like, there's no right or wrong answer. It's like, are you motivated by fame, fortune, or respect? Right. And those are very, very different. To me, it's always respect. I think probably then recognition, then financial gain. Right. So for me, I like being recognized for doing things well and maybe that other people can't do. And so there's probably an element of respect that's my primary driver. And then there's recognition. I don't need to be cuddled or coddled. I'm just, hey, that was pretty good. I'm good with that. My dad was kind of a Bear Bryant type of a guy. My first entrepreneurial CEOs I was super lucky. Like, I think my first three or four managers ended up being CEOs.
Mm.
So I had really good mentors and they were tough. Like, I've never met mentors that are super sweet. They were tough. And then financial gain. And so I think probably early though, young, I was thinking, I want to be successful because I want to make money. But pretty quickly, probably by my mid to late 20s, I thought, I've got things to say, things to share. I can build stuff better than people because people aren't building stuff well enough. And
Mhm.
so it became probably an aspirational desire. And then later, I realized maybe in my early 30s when I got a chance to run the Bausch and Lomb surgical business in my early 30s. Pretty big job, had a couple hundred people and a couple $100 million business. And I was the youngest person really in the business leading older people that had all seen me grow up there.
Everybody else is in their 40s, ish around
40s,
there. Or,
50s.
yeah.
I think at one time I had like 5 or 6 former bosses that I was leading. So pretty scary, but I realized that the commitment to put yourself out there, share ideas, take a stand, to really take the opportunity and burden to lead is so rare that if you do it and you're authentic, I hate that word, but if you're authentic about it, like people will know you really want to lead and build something, you'll find a lot of followers. I think I've shown you one time that first followers video. That's really something. It's not the leader, it's the first follower, the person who
Hmm.
decides to follow them. And so over the years
Hmm.
I've been super fortunate to pick up like people that are like, hey, he's a little crazy, but he tends to win and I want to be part of that team.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and it's, I'm sure some of it, a lot of it has to do, as you said, your childhood, watching your parents, being a striker. I think, naturally aggressive and feeling the burden of, if you don't perform I mean, everybody's role is important, but if you don't do your job, the team doesn't win.
Yeah.
And I think, obviously your success, but wanting to lead from the front, something that not everyone's willing to do. So I suspect somebody saw early on that, this Carnell guy going somewhere, and let's give him a shot at it.
Yeah. It sounds terrible. I'm not great at supporting cast. Like, as a midfielder, I always wanted to be the teammate that when the game was on line, give me the ball. And I was always okay with the fear of failure, with rejection, with feeling that pressure. So for whatever reason, I guess, even probably in my career, if I probably stayed, I grew up through large companies, started with Johnson& Johnson. We were acquired, my division was acquired by Chiron. Later went to work for Gambro, started my dialysis centers. We were acquired by DaVita. I went back and ran Bausch& and
All
Lomb
right, all right,
Surgery.
all right, all right. Hold on. You got an
Yeah,
interesting pivot there. So
yeah,
going because I've seen this on the consulting side. Like, you're on early 30s, you got a P&L, a couple $100 million, you get acquired, there's room to grow up there. And then you go to do something entrepreneurial. Like, I know the story, but like, explain to people what's in your wiring. Cause like most people are like, I can see a path in a rocket ship. I'm just going to do that.
yeah. Yeah, well, interesting thing coming out of I went to Duke University, which was really a great school, but Duke at that time in the early 90s was really, you were going, it was your undergrad going to your profession, right? So doctors, lawyers, investment bankers. And I didn't know because my father wasn't one of those. He was an entrepreneur. And, I chased the soccer ball into that good school. And so I told people I was going to be a lawyer. And then I got out and started selling. And I got lucky enough pretty early on to get a surgical job with Johnson Johnson. But big companies have so many positive things, right? You learn structure, discipline, kind of how to be a grown up in the workplace, what's rewarded. It's good pay. You kind of get the names on the resume, but it wasn't as fulfilling to me because I didn't feel like my personal effort could impact the organization
Mm.
enough. And it wasn't like I can do so much better. I was just thinking, is this all there is? Probably early to life. And I thought, what about like if I take all of this learning, I can like build stuff. I can be, the leader of an organization. I can create one of these companies. And so, you hear a lot of entrepreneurs say that, just like they had something to say and something to prove and something to do. And so they just had to go make it happen. But I don't want to ever discount for your listeners like who've come through large companies or thinking about leaving a large company. I would never discount the skills you pick up there. I mean, I have as many lessons from those Johnson Johnson, Chiron, Bausch and Lomb, Gambro days as I certainly have as an entrepreneur. And arguably, they gave me a better opportunity and more predictability on later on leading organizations.
Yeah. I mean,
So, yeah,
huge foundation. My sense is, I mean, you tell me, like, you pick up those skills and you take the dialysis leap and the entrepreneurial side, but like, doesn't go well. You can jump back into the pool, I'm sure. And, you've already got your track record there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the Matrix, right? I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, but all this stuff is made up. All the language is made up. And so, like, I think the illusion of a big company making you more safe is really, really an illusion.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's safe until it's not. But betting on yourself should be the safest place,
Hmm.
right? You know your strengths, you know your weaknesses. You can surround yourself with people that can offset or augment those characteristics you have. So I've never been afraid of kind of going without a net. It arguably would have been a safer, easier path staying with a large company. I remember when I left Bausch, like most people around me were just shocked. I'd already started my dialysis centers. I'd made a little money, but it really wasn't about the money. It was about making an impact, doing something that was noteworthy, that I could say, hey, I was a big part of that, whether it's a small team or, returning money to investors. I just wanted to have the ability to be a score goal.
So this is the part that I find always interesting because, like, when we've jammed together on different things, and people are like, "Hey, Clint," I mean, everyone's asking, like, "Clint, will you run this for me and do that?" And then they find out that, yeah, I could do that, but I'm running three other things at the same time. People are like, "What?" So, like, at some point, it sounds like you were the general manager of a massive division in doing something entrepreneurial at the same time, and so that was an interesting choice. You didn't leave the corporate job. You were like, "I can do both at the same time." And kind of what was behind that thinking?
Yeah, I think I must have been 27, 28 years old, and I'd been an M&A guy doing corporate development for Gambro. And look, great company, but we were buying these facilities that I thought were like they were in subpar real estate. We were buying them just to roll them up. Are they accretive? Is it more EBITDA? I mean, it was very financially engineered. So my job was just to buy these and then build new facilities, and growth would take care of itself. And we had a deal. My side kind of lost out politically,
Mm,
which was probably fortuitous. And one of the deals I was trying to do, like, the providers were like, "Hey, we were never going to do a deal with them, but you're a business guy, and we're doctors, and what about if we got together and built a business?" I'm like, "Sure." And so, believe it or not, I wrote. It's kind of like modern day AI, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Sat down and I made up a business plan based upon my knowledge. And I went to the bank and asked them for money, and crap, they gave me money. And then I found a facility, and along the way I picked up a partner. He was super old. He was like 47 at the time, but he knew what he was doing. So, arguably a lot of these companies, particularly early, I think it's good to have good partners if you can. So I was like the deal guy, right? I found the real estate, I raised the money, I kind of put everybody together from a leadership vision standpoint. I found a great partner who'd exited before. He was the ops guy and was really well known in the space. And then the doctors. And we started that first one, almost went bankrupt because 9/11 hit. And we rode it through, barely survived. And, essentially, when I rejoined Bausch, I called my old boss and I said, "Hey, Tom, I put every dollar into this new venture. I'm going to be super rich, but I need a job. Do you have anything for me to do?" And he hired me for like kind of a strategic job. And then he left. And a couple years later, I was running the division. And it was interesting because part of it was like I had in my mind convinced myself that Charleston Renal Care was going to be all I ever needed. I was going to make a ton of money. And so this was just fun. I was going to play Bausch and Lomb sport as well as I could, score as many goals as I could, be as good as I could, because it really didn't matter. But what it gave me is the ability to be a really truthful leader. Like, I wasn't kissing anybody's butt. I wasn't trying to do anything, but do a really good job for the business I was running, and it really was quite freeing. And then, it worked out pretty well. It was interesting though, because at that time, particularly like 2000, 2005, I don't think it was seen. Technology was just starting to really be able to augment human performance. And it was just so weird for people that I was very young with a very big job. And I had this other career. I think they investigated me because of some whistleblower 3 or 4 times. And every time they come back and say, yeah, it's exactly what you disclosed when you were hired. But it didn't mean somebody wasn't jealous inside the
yeah.
large company
Yeah.
about what I was doing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've always had that track a little bit, is enjoying a large company, but also recognizing that, I had an itch to scratch with an entrepreneurial venture.
Okay. So I got, when we jammed about this, and even our cat Elastigirl is fascinated by this story. So, like, you've described in the first kind of real chapter of leadership in your career, I think three different CEO models that we talked about, right? You were a buyer. You were doing M&A, buying dialysis centers, and you were like, okay, you were doing that role. That led you to become a builder. You're like, these deals are great. Why aren't we doing it? Type of a thing. And so you decided to build from scratch. And it's interesting to think about, like, I suppose there are, there must be other M&A or deal guys who become builders, but like it's an interesting route. And then you become a manager of a very large established company. And so you have these three experiences. And you and I have talked about, like, there's exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, there are three types of CEOs: kind of builders, buyers, and managers. So, if and then you would go on to repeat this pattern of doing all three at various points in your career to, your, half dozen plus different roles there. So, like, if current Clint could tell young Clint, like, hey man, you don't avoid these pitfalls and potholes, and there's an evergreen playbook as a CEO, regardless if you're a manager, builder, or buyer. Like, because I remember when you brought me in across the line from being a spectator to being in the arena there, I was like, it was very eye opening for me to see, like, oh, this guy has a real process, and it's very precious to you. And so, like, what can you describe the playbook that's evergreen?
Yeah. Look, first, I think just to be clear with your listeners, there's not a bad type in there. I think we fall in love with the entrepreneurs a lot, right? The Steve Jobs and the Elon Musks of the world. Reed Hastings get a lot of credit for being the visionaries, and that's probably the ones that the movies are written about, right? But if you're running the company and cash flow is important, EBITDA is important, it's maybe more mature. Like, just don't screw it up and grab. I think I've got a ship steering wheel behind me here. Like, sometimes you just need to navigate and keep the passengers and the cargo safe and get to harbor. And you maybe don't want to take a lot of risks. And the charts, the path's been charted before. So just captain of the ship, just steer this thing in. So first of all, to the manager, CEOs, nothing wrong with that. And a lot of times that's, particularly in large companies, that's what the boards are looking for, right? So nothing wrong with that.
I mean, to your
I think
point, nobody wants Tim Cook to be a maverick, crazy guy. I mean, you
yeah,
could argue maybe a little. I mean, people reminisce about Jobs and the like, but Apple is so important to the S&P, to the US GDP. Like, you do need a calm hand to kind of, as you said, be a good adult and manage that baby through the
yeah,
waters and stuff. So,
yeah. And also it has to turn them on, right? Like, I think Steve Jobs, if you were alive, I can only imagine he would have gone nuts with those kind of constraints, right? But Tim Cook seems to handle it really well. I mean, even in the political environment now where tech CEOs are very involved in politics, I think that probably would have played out very differently. So if you're a managerial CEO, if that's what your skill set is, don't take any negativity on it. There's buyer CEOs. I think they tend to be ones, they're like, hey, I got to make this thing bigger. I'll, get the synergies out, which is code for cutting costs. And a larger organization growing faster with better earnings is going to be worth more. And I'm going to get my piece. Right. And there's nothing wrong with that because there's companies that have done very well through an acquisition strategy. And then there's the builders that we discussed. And I'm probably a hybrid in there. I've done all three. But in the end, I would say you want to align your talents and what really gets you excited with what the company needs. And I often tell people, look, what are you looking for? Because I'll tell you if I have that skill set. And if that lines up, magic can happen. If that doesn't line up, really bad things can happen. What is surprising to me a lot of times is boards are looking for a CEO and they're looking for, kind of lines on the resume that match up. And a lot of times they don't ask that question. And the other weird thing is builders are sometimes buyers. Like, I'm working on a deal right now that is a builder buyer play, but I haven't seen many buyers that are builders.
unpack that a little more. Say more about that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's not bad because if you're a buyer, you're out there looking externally and you're saying, what can I buy to put it together with what I have to take costs out and make more money over what time horizon? So it's very formulaic in many ways. And so I just find those folks, and you tend to spot them. They have good relationship with lawyers, good relationships with the banks, and you see them doing a lot of deals, right? And that can be very very value creating for the right set of shareholders and board. I tend to be probably more attracted to the build with buy if it makes sense as companies scale, but it's just weird. They're just different, right? It's like, if you're a football player and you show up and you're 320 pounds, right? And somebody says you play in the NFL, they probably wouldn't guess you're a quarterback. It's okay because somebody's got to protect the quarterback. And a fast, strong 320-pound dude can do a lot for the Tom Brady's of the world. So it's not good or bad. I would just say that identifying them early based upon the company's need is really important.
Well, I think, I mean, we've discussed this when you were at the helm and looking at different acquisition targets of like, I mean, my sense of it, and tell me if you agree with this, is that the buyers who are primarily buyers, my observation is they tend to buy the past. As you said, very good. Like there could be a past asset that's being mismanaged, or if you put two, titans from years ago and put them together, there, synergy.
Yep.
There's value to be created there. And then the builders slash buyers are the ones who tend to buy the future. And I think about the Google buying the YouTube and like, yes, I'm going to drop this. It's $1.6 billion and it has, barely even if any revenue, but it's going to do this. I'm going to buy Android. I'm going to do that. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I think a lot of builder buyers are buying capabilities. Like if they know it's hard, a lot of times they'll buy capabilities. In fact, a deal I'm working on is buying capabilities, and some of my deals have been known as like a sales marketing branding guy. And on this one, I'm like, I'm not worried about that. Like I'm buying capabilities because I know the brands that will either, buy or
Yeah.
build. And so I think that's different. And I think, look, your original question was like, what's the playbook? I do think that every CEO has to have a playbook. I was recently talking to a CEO that I was advising. I'm like, look, I don't know what your like leadership purpose is. I'm not sure your team does. I don't. Does your board? Like people have to know how you coach. And so for me, I do have a very specific playbook. And it starts with whether you're at a company that needs kind of a manager, a company that is in builder stage or a company that's in buyer stage. I try to bring like elements of the playbook to the new venture, but I think you really need to keep your eyes open and say, okay, what's fundamentally either the problem this company's solving, the opportunity it's unlocking, and more importantly, is like why now, why us, and why now? Like why can that company win? And I think you and I have worked over the years with Grayspace on simplifying strategy to accelerate execution. And people always come to you and I and say, hey, either Eddie can do the analytic work or Clint can do the branding work, and that's what we'll pay him for. And I think they're always surprised when we spend a lot of time trying to identify what do you guys stand for? Like, why do you think you win? Why do you think you're losing? What are you guys excited about? Why would customers buy from you? And I think if you can get that problem down to the most basic problem, organize a solution around it, and make that the basis of your strategy, it's incredibly important because in the end, I always start heavy on the diagnosis of the company or opportunity, then start to build the strategy, and then really dream about if we're right, what's that win look like in a 12, 18, 24 month or 5 year process. Because if you do that, it's interesting. The recruiting part's pretty easy. I mean, I was having a conversation earlier today, and the person I was talking to said, well, they want to invest, but they said there's not a full team in place. And we were both laughing. We're like, how the hell would there be a full team in place if we don't have a fully developed vision? The vision will bring the team because great players want to play on teams where the coach and the owners have a vision there. And look, we always have to put a model together that says, here's what we need in revenue and EBITDA, and here's what we're going to buy it for, our entry point, here's what we're going to exit for. But really, that strategy is so important. And I think that's where you and I have been good partners over the years.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's super fun because like I think this why us, why now. I mean, my observation is, I mean, we've talked about this, is that I kind of put strategy into three buckets, like be the winner, be the best, or be the future, be different, whatever that looks
Yeah.
like, right?
Yeah.
And that I think that a lot of people when they do the vision, it's either mamby pamby doesn't really mean anything, or we're going to be number one, and that's kind of what they're all kind of fixated. The competition's there, I'm going to take it from, or I got the best technology. When we were in Paris earlier in the year, and I was walking around my first IMCAS and I was like, dude, I can read the words, but it's all a word salad. I don't understand what I was talking about here. And,
Eddie,
and I think,
it's more common than not. I mean, you and I have sat through these sessions like where in boardrooms, I mean, I was in a boardroom the other day where people were obsessively talking, smart people talking about the price and the specific features and the specific benefits. And I'm like, I don't know why anybody buy with it from us. Like, can anybody stand up and tell me? Because we're just talking to ourselves about things that don't matter, right? And so, yeah, I would say that unfortunately, the reason there's an 80/20 rule is like probably 80% of the companies are kind of doing it wrong.
yeah, they're
They're
100%.
they're lying to themselves, right? It's our price. It's a feature. If we only had that. Look, I've made a lot of money for other people on like kind of products that weren't necessarily that great, but where we found an angle where people wanted to buy from us. In fact, I'm not sure. I've rarely had the technologically superior product because a lot of times I've come into situations where something wasn't working and I had to figure it out with a team. And, I can walk through specific examples, but without calling anybody out, I've also seen companies where they've crushed it and they made a couple of key decisions. They've lost their way for that
Yeah.
same way.
Yeah. Well, I love it because I remember you telling me early about, kind of the whole, uh, ophthalmology space. And you were like, my sense of your career as you've talked to me about it is like, you at one point faced a superior technology, LASIK. You're like, oh, that is that is clearly different and better. I need to do something, completely orthogonal to what that is so that I'm not competing with them on a feature, a benefit or a price perspective. But because I think to your point, one of the things I'll say it because I know you don't want to say it, but like as somebody who has built, I think what, 4 out of the 6 actual consumer brands in the aesthetic space, like that you've built from scratch and oftentimes not with the superior technology necessarily with it. Like, and so when you say kind of why us, why now, like what's your strategy, what's the vision, what do you stand for? More often than not, I find that y- there's a part of you that's kind of, bored. You don't want to say something that somebody else has said,
Yeah.
just do something different. And
Yeah.
then invariably the unusualness of you as a buyer, builder, manager, you could start with the shareholder. That would be an understandable place. You could start with the employee, but you tend to start with the customer. And then oftentimes, especially in the medical aesthetic space, we've coined this kind of the B2B2C strategy. You're not just good at seeing the customer, but the customer's customer at the end of the day
Yeah.
and helping them simplify all of that. Like, so how does that work from an evergreen playbook?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, looking at each one of the problems, like why really are people not buying? So, I'll give you the example from ophthalmology. I was young in my career. Bausch and Lomb had amazing technology, but we were about 4 years behind our largest competitor at the time, which was Vizx, and they'd gone public and they'd taken all the oxygen out of the room. And so I was forced with like, it's kind of how I got my big break. It's like I could sell this and one other person who could sell this, and we're still good friends today. And so they like got rid of everybody and just made us the two super sales guys. And what was interesting is an excimer laser was, a couple £1,000s. What people didn't know is once they spent $500,000, the doctor actually had to build out a separate room, train the staff on it. And so the issue wasn't, do they like our laser better? We were 5 years late. They'd already put somebody else's laser in. They'd built a room around it. And it was part of their practice. And so our little Rubik's Cube was like, how can we make a dent? And so I had the US business. I didn't have global. So we came up with a harebrained idea, like who really does most of the LASIK? And it turned out about 200 doctors in the US did a disproportionate amount of LASIK. So we said, so we're really not covering 7,000 ophthalmologists here. We need 200. And so we put a war room together. We put all of their names up there. And then, okay, why won't they buy from us? Well, they probably don't want to spend $300,000 or $400,000 for a build out just so they can buy from us. So not only is it technology, but it's a capital and a change of their physical space. And so we came up with a way with if they did a certain amount of treatments, we'd actually provide them laser at no charge because they were the highest
Wow.
volume. They could commit to us.
Yes.
And then they were like, okay, I'll do the build out because our technology fundamentally was better. So the issue wasn't our technology. It was their office space, right? It was the fact they had to buy our technology and buy their office space on the build out. And it's been too long ago. I'm sure I will mess up the numbers, but it's how I made my career as a young vice president at Bausch because we fundamentally flipped it. The laser didn't change. Our competitor's laser didn't change. We solved the problem for them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at, say, HydraFacial, we took a position in the marketplace. Skincare was confusing, right? If you're the only thing I'm more confused about skincare, and I'm in the business, is like yogurt sitting at the grocery store. I'm very confused by that. And so we came up with 3 steps, 30 minutes, best skin of your life. You got to get it, right? Because it's cleanse, extract, hydrate. The consumer is like, I know that. And then we equipped the hydrofacialist, the esthetician with that, because we found out she was the most influential person. We put those two together like peanut butter and jelly, and off we went, right? So we were solving simplicity, time commitment, and we identified who the person was. I remember years ago at Solta when we kind of inherited that, Thermage hurt, right? You couldn't really see the results. And yet their marketing campaign, which had happened on TV through a physician, was It's a lunchtime facelift. So it sounds super weird, but we came up with when lotions and potions aren't enough and surgery's too much, there's Thermage, because it was a great prophylactic agent. It was like lifting
Yeah.
weights. You got to do it. You do little micro tears and,
Yeah.
your muscles look good over time. We also told primarily women at that time, they already knew beauty hurt. So we were like, and it hurts, but right, I get off the table. It's great. And still, lotions and potions don't work, and surgery's too much. There's Thermage. We're not for everybody, but if you're okay with that, it's good. And when I joined in like November or September of '05, we were, everybody thought we were done. By November of '06, we took it sold to public. And
Crazy.
so each one of those three stories, just in my little career, were very different challenges. And what I see a lot of times is CEOs come in or any executive comes in like, at my last place, I did this. And so all they do is change the font and the Pantone. And I don't know, maybe I'm just a glutton for like curiosity. But I think if you really think about the problem and unique to why it's really not working, that's where you get your marketing campaign, your brand. That's where you energize your people. And that's where your customers go, hey, somebody figured it out.
Well,
Right.
it
So probably
it's
long winded,
fascinating.
but that's
No,
the
no, no,
best way
no.
to describe it.
It's perfect because I think it's the best thing that if current Clint telling young Clint, and as a proxy for you telling a first time CEO anything about how do you, why don't you find a simple and overlooked problem that means it, and where if you solve that one thing, forward momentum gets unlocked, whether for your customer or your customer's customer, and that it's such an elegant way. And I credit the variety of experiences that you had, because I just don't know many buyers who think that. And oftentimes you have builders, but they tend to be product and technology people who are like, I'm building this great product. And the managers, you got to manage the people and the team and the economics, and you're not necessarily spending time with customers. And so like, it's the sales part of you, it's the dialysis part where you're like, what it's like to set up physical space. And it's one of those things where you had to tell me, hey, they don't have an extra room to sell that into, so just be aware of
Crazy.
the practical realities of stuff. And so a simple, practical, overlooked problem, and you just kind of hone in on that, and you have empathy for it, and you move that up to the front, and you deal with it like a human. And guess what? Economics and abundance kind of unlocks from there.
And it's got to be specific. I mean, Charleston Renal Care, I was buying facilities. The facilities weren't great. My impression was the staff were not being treated great. They weren't inspiring. And so they were treating the patients. If you have end stage renal disease, that's serious. Like they were going to die. And so I was naive enough to go, what about if we built nice facilities? What about if we created a culture where our staff was excited and they treated the patients like they were going to live, not like they were going to die? And we whooped on the market leader. And their answer every week was they were going to sue us. And we ended up getting acquired by DaVita. We started Orange Twist. It was super simple. I was like, this is kind of weird. How are people going to know about this stuff? Because none of us have a budget unless they see it in action. And so we put the first Orange Twist, which now is all med spas, like next to a Whole Foods and a Barry's Boot Camp and Orange Theory. The view was like, isn't this a lifestyle choice? And we couldn't even explain it at the time because, as you know, I mean, category pirates, you guys are the king of this. And that's why when you brought language to like how my brain kind of naturally worked. It's like there's a problem there, so we're going to frame that problem, we're going to name it, and then we're going to claim it. And now you can't even think. When I just told somebody the other day, I'm like, we did Orange Twist was one of the first to put these at Sightline, make them nice, put them next to a Whole Foods, and they're like, of course. I'm like, no, no. When we did that, everybody thought we were crazy, right? To me, it was so intuitive. Like, mom needs to wander in when she's dropping off her kids to Color by Me or going to the gym. Like, aren't they treating themselves like, and we couldn't even describe it. So sometimes like with HydraFacial, probably with Orange Twist, those are two clearly category makers or participants. And you kind of stumbled upon the language that ends up defining it, but you have to have kind of a natural instinct on where it is.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the first followers signed up behind you, that people and culture you're building, they don't even know either. They're like, I don't know. I mean, I've heard the, I don't know. I mean, at my, like, always my roasting, because I'm a tough guy to work for. Like, I demand a lot. My roastings are always very funny because they're always like, I don't know. He talked me into it. He didn't even tell me what he's going to pay me. I had a shitty office in a shitty building, but here we are millions of dollars later in a nice office with a nice building, and I had a blast. And now I got to go work with them again. So you kind of, as the leader, part of the playbook is define that problem, set the strategy, and amazing, depending upon the challenge, I tend to find missionaries, not mercenaries,
Yes.
people that sign up for the vision. And what people don't often see, and you've had a peek behind the, people don't realize as a leader, part of that playbook is then you have to have a really rigorous training schedule. And in corporate speak, that means rigorous board board meeting prep, offsites to discuss strategy, every 2 weeks, strategy revisions, Monday staff meetings, Friday huddles, monthly KPIs. So, once the coach says, look, we're going 10-0, boys, and we're going to win, and here's how we're going to win. And he gets a bunch of men to sign up and say, sure, I want to play for that guy. You can't cut out, the training, the fitness schedule, strength training schedule, the diet,
Yeah.
curfew, how we treat each other
Yeah.
in the locker room and on the field, and how we treat our fans. And you have to have all the reporting requirements to measure the results, but there's plenty of people to keep score.
Yeah. All right.
There's lots of scorekeepers out
You
there.
just dropped a lot of good stuff here. So you talked about CEOs are in charge of strategy, the team, and the financials, the economics, the value creation. On the strategy side, I think part of your evergreen playbook is, you know what, if you just kind of find a simple, I'll call it sequentially important, like nothing goes forward unless you solve this little thing. And with empathy and emotion, like you've talked about orange twist. Remember we had the jam about like, if you have empathy for your customer, that builds trust and that'll unlock all the economics that you want there. And so I think it's so different than a lot of kind of the strategy books of like, Porter Five Forces. You look at your competitors and this and that, but like, no, let's have empathy for the customer. Find a simple, sequentially important and overlooked problem that if you make progress on that, they will make progress with you. And you learn that as a sales guy. You want the head nodding early on, and then you can
Yeah.
build momentum from there. And then if you
Yeah.
do that, and then that provides empathy, that builds trust, and that unlocks all the other stuff. But then, as you said, all you then have to do is frame, name, and claim a solution to that simple, sequentially important, and overlooked problem. 3 steps, 30 minutes, best skin of your life to heck if I know what I'm doing with my skin and what am I, it's overwhelming to me. And so I think just that simple playbook that any first time CEO, you're like drowning in strategies. There's the old person strategy, and you got, Yahoos like me who've never run anything saying, you do this and that or whatever. Shut it all out. Spend time with your customers. Clint, you'll love this, is that I saw a study in HBR that said that for companies around 14 billion on average in size of revenue, CEOs spend about 3% of their time with their super consumers. And it's
It's
incredible.
incredible. Eddie, I saw that because you did that in one of your Substacks, right? I mean, that is incredible. Like, what the hell are you leading if 97% of your time is internal? Like, I just don't understand. I mean, if you take on the premise that the CEO is responsible for strategy in any organization, which I would, my view is they are, how do you know what's going on if you're that way? I mean, I remember when we were locked down during COVID, some executives had joined us, and I started getting back out again, and somebody griped to one of my executives I've been with a long time. And she was like, oh my God, are you kidding? I want him out of here. When we're back in action, he's out there with the customers. He's out there with our salespeople. He's going to events. He's doing shows. And it's not because I particularly enjoy travel, even though I realize from my Bonvoy points now, I've spent 4 years of my life in a Marriott, which is depressing. I've flown well over 3.5, 4 million miles now. But I don't know how else, if you're going to lead an organization, if you're not out there, you know what's going on. I mean, maybe that's good for the managerial types where, it's important to have good board relationships, important to spend time with all your constituents. And as a CEO, I mean, particularly as a public company CEO, or I've been in private equity, like, I'm not saying ignore your constituents. You need to set really clear expectations of how often your investors need you. If you're a public company, you've got to be super diligent and disciplined about how you report. But you need to be so disciplined about that you have time to run the business. Otherwise, you're just going to be reporting on poor quarterly earnings.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot where you get first time CEOs, they're all over the place, spending too much time at the private equity firm's office thinking if they like me, I'll be
Right.
successful.
Right.
Private equity likes people that are successful, not the other
Yes.
way around. For public company, like, it's fine to have the chit chats. Once you do it a couple times, you realize that it's just they're checking the boxes and they're asking you questions and they're keeping notes. You'll be fired if you're not out there with your customers and successful. And you don't have a choice if you're the entrepreneur. I've never seen a successful entrepreneur. It's like, I started this from the corner office in the ivory tower and somehow it just all worked out.
Yeah.
So, I think that's super important. And that was so discouraging. But now we know why we all receive like super shitty customer service, right?
Yes.
If the
100%.
CEO is only out there 3% of the time, they're actually not eating their own dog food like we've often talked about.
Well, and the sad part of it is, and we've been writing about this in Category Pirates, is you can use AI and agents to mimic your super consumer. It's actually not that I would advocate it, but you could get away just being in your office if you were actually exactly as you said, like, hey, what am I supposed to do? I have this $500,000 laser, and the doctor's like, I don't have the room for it. Why would I buy that? In fact, to build out. ChatGPT is actually pretty good at mimicking and role playing. And so that you say, like, hey, I want you to be my customer, and this is the situation. Here's my pitch. Remember at Janea, we were doing all the Dragon Slayer pitches, and like, if we were to redo that again, you could totally create a bunch of role playing. It's like you're this customer, you're Orange Twist. I mean, we not hard to clone Denise. She's an iconic
Yeah.
person and the like, right? But
Yeah.
hey,
Yep.
and so many people want Denise's time, and she'd be thrilled to train an agent. Say, talk to the agent first, so that you know how to sell to me. And
Yeah.
everybody wins in that way when you use AI.
Yeah, the journal just had a article today that I was reading at lunch about becoming as like a super AI user is like the greatest compliment you can get right now, and how much more those people are making than their peers, and how it's being seen as so people that aren't using it are quickly getting outdistanced
Yes,
far
yes,
faster than any technology we've seen, and I haven't adopted it to the level that I'd like, but I am certainly learning and teaching my agent, and I'm surrounding myself with a lot of people that are
yeah,
better to get there. And I see a world building, half of the company to do what I normally would have had to have done through traditional job roles and bricks and mortar and space and telephones and computers and all the licensees. I think it augments human performance. I'm not afraid of AI.